On behalf of the Charleston County Public Library, I'd like to thank you for coming out to this program here tonight. My name is Nic Butler. I'm a public historian here at the Charleston County Public Library. And I had this idea a few months ago to do something for Black History Month that was more recent history. And I started combing through the calendar, like historians are wont to do, and looking at anniversaries and what kind of anniversaries are coming up. So in 2014, I realized this is the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I thought, well, that's a good reason to have a program, and February is the perfect time to do it. And it would be really nice to have some voice who remembers 1964 and who has seen the changes that have taken place in our community since 1964. And of course, the first name that came to my mind in the Charleston Low Country area is Bill Saunders. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to this program that's really a conversation with Bill Saunders to give him an opportunity to speak his mind in the context of how far we've come since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So if you'll indulge me for just a moment, I'm going to give you some background information to make sure we're all on the same page, talking about the same thing. We understand the context in which these events unfolded and Mr. Saunders' career unfolded. So I've prepared a few remarks, and then we'll get right into a conversation. So as we all know, 1964, the United States Supreme Court ruled in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. And they declared that state-sponsored segregation in America's public schools was unconstitutional. And as momentous and important as that court ruling was, it did not trigger any immediate change. It was a court decision, not a law. So rather, it paved the way for government legislation to force southern states and local school districts in the South to end the Jim Crow fictional notion of separate but equal institutions that had been around for many generations by the 1950s. So the desegregation of Charleston schools began tentatively in 1963, but it wasn't until federal legislation came along a little bit later to truly break down the long-standing racial barriers in our community and in other southern communities. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was ratified by President Johnson on the 2nd of July, 1964. It was not the first Civil Rights Act passed by the U.S. Congress in our history, nor was it the last. But it was a landmark tool that outlawed major forms of discrimination based on race, ethnicity, national background, sex, or religion. It ended unequal voter registration requirements, or sought to end unequal voter registration requirements. And more significantly, it sought to end racial segregation in schools, in the workplace, and any facility that served the general public. So powers given to enforce the act were initially rather weak, but those powers were supplemented in later years by additional legislation, such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So here in 2014, I think it's significant that the webpage of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee states very clearly that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was, quote, the nation's benchmark civil rights legislation. So 50 years later, we need to talk about how relevant, how important is that piece of legislation. And if you want to talk about how that legislation impacted the Low Country 50 years ago, we really need voices from 50 years ago. And we're very lucky to have with us William Bill Saunders, who was born in New York in 1935, came to live with his extended family on Johns Island in 1936. And I'm not going to give a full biography of him because we'd be here all night. He's a very active man. But I just want to hit a few key highlights. In 1951, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. He was not quite of age, but they let him in. And he served in Korea, where he was wounded, and in the 21st century, finally received his well-deserved Purple Heart. After receiving an honorable discharge from the Army in 1954, he returned to South Carolina, and he completed high school, and he started a family. He also became the business manager for a Johns Island organization called the Progressive Club, a grassroots organization that campaigned to improve the economic, political, and educational conditions of the black community. In the 1950s and 1960s, Mr. Saunders worked alongside local civil rights activists such as Esau Jenkins and Septima Clark, though he did not always agree with their methods. By the mid-1960s, Mr. Saunders had become frustrated with the passive, nonviolent philosophy that we think of as mainstream civil rights activism. He became a proponent of self-defense and argued that active resistance to segregation and discrimination, rather than patient pacifism, was the correct path towards immediate social justice. When Stokely Carmichael, who was then a lightning rod for the Black Power movement, visited Mr. Saunders here in the Low Country in 1967, the local press described Saunders as, quote, the Johns Island Negro militant. In Charleston in 1969, Mr. Saunders played a central role in what became known as the Hospital Workers' Strike, a 113-day protest for equal rights that garnered national attention. Acting as an intermediary, an advisor, and a negotiator throughout the strike, Mr. Saunders earned a well-deserved reputation as a compassionate and sincere community activist. In the 1970s, he cemented that reputation by launching a nonprofit organization called the Committee for Better Racial Assurance, better known as COBRA, and becoming involved in a number of economic and political ventures aimed at advancing the black community. Since that time, he has been a tireless advocate for equality and justice in the Charleston Low Country. And along the way, Mr. Saunders has garnered a wide variety of awards, honors, citations, and recognitions, and I have here a list of a number of those. And I won't take the time to read them to you all, and many of you already know a number of these. In recent times, he is a commissioner on the board of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, which is a federally recognized cultural heritage corridor, very important to the Low Country of South Carolina. And he's still active with COBRA and still active in the community, doing speaking engagements just like this. But tonight we're very honored and very pleased to have him with us tonight to give us a little bit of insight from 50 years of experience, 50 years plus experience, fighting for civil rights in the Low Country. I have a few questions that I want to use to kind of begin the conversation, and then after a few questions, perhaps we'll turn it over to the audience and let the audience ask a few questions and try to wrap up everything so you all have time to get out of here and have a good evening at home. So let's go back to 1964 first. Mr. Saunders, let me ask this to begin. In 1964, did the ratification of that Civil Rights Act at the federal level, did it even register here in the Low Country? Did you have any awareness of it? Did it give you hope or courage, or was it just another kind of promise that never really trickled down to the
Well, most of us that was involved didn't see that making any big difference. South Carolina and Charleston have never been really a part of America, so what the American past never had very much to do with this. I'd like to first make a couple of comments.
Sure.
But, normally, I don't get invited back. And so I would get by licking because I wouldn't be able to do this again. But, you know, if you take a look at where you're located right now on Calhoun Street, and in 1963, a group of us, including Attorney Bernard Fielding, really picketed right outside, just up and down the street, because they were going to build in 62, going to build a municipal auditorium. And right on every place on this was where blacks live, and I'm not a real powerful black family because they were all working on Longshoreman. And they bought those houses with 2-3 rooms, and they added on rooms, they redid it, and all that stuff. And they had a real, that was what was called Wall Street. That was the name of the street. And you know, there was a, you know, all of the stuff that the black community needed. You know, they had a doctor's office, lawyer's office, they had drugstores, and all kind of things that the community needed. It was a built-in community. And when they passed, when Mayor Gilliard decided that all of this was going to happen, it really did a job on that family. And a lot of those family ended up being separated and getting divorced, and the kids didn't want to want to leave the city and those kind of stuff. It was a very interesting guy that had a nightclub right on the corner of Alexander and Calhoun Street. And they said that no business, no black business, could be on Calhoun Street. So all the business, huh?
That was my father.
Okay. And anyway, the most interesting thing that he did is that he closed the door on Calhoun Street and opened the door on Alexander Street. And it's still none of that worked. They made it where there's some blacks that own houses on Anderson Street, big houses. They said they couldn't live there anymore. They had to sell it. So when you get to the point of talking about civil rights, and folk like me finally got to the point that we really got involved with, we talked about human rights. And that has been my struggle from going back into the 60s, dealing with can we have human rights. And the kind of thing that they did with these properties, you said you live on Main Street. We had one of the best mean black gang group back called the Jackson Street Panthers. Used to be in that area back during those times that we were able to use during the hospice thing to help the hospital workers. But there's a lot of things that were just really not up to par. And I worked on Anderson Street to the mattress factory. I worked there for 27 years. So the whole time when I was involved in all of that stuff, I was involved in working at the mattress factory. But the kind of stuff that, and the group that I headed for a while on John's Honor, is that we didn't have any problem with separate. We had a problem with equal. When I went to school, I can go, and the books came, because the books came from the vice group. So I can go and pull out a book with Bill's name in it, and it was already damaged, so that we never had anything as it relates to equal. The school that I went to had no lights, had no nothing, no heating system. So we wanted to have just equal, and the whole thing about being with white people was not one of the goals that we had at that particular point. But again, it really didn't help very much the people of the community. It made good news, but it didn't make that much.
Right, and I suspect it as such because the government is saying, here's what the law is supposed to be, but it doesn't actually mean that it happens right away. And since you brought up the school situation, separate, so-called separate but equal kind of schools, let me ask a follow-up question on that. One of the most controversial parts of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the requirement that schools have a racially mixed ratio in the schools, and that meant busing children, white children and black children, to different schools to equalize the racial demographics of the schools. And everybody knew, even before the law passed, that that was going to be difficult, it was going to be controversial. And that was something that you spoke out against as well.
Yeah, I've been accused of being on the side of so many different people. At that point, I was accused of being on the side of George Wallace because he felt the same way that I felt. Why did somebody have to be bussed out of your neighborhood to go to school? To the school where you go, but that whole set of rules was set to make people fight against each other. And that's why very rarely we have a discussion. And when you were talking about the black community, we would never talk about the poor white community, who suffered through all of those things. That most of it was a pawn in the middle of the ruling class and the black community. But we had, me and a lot of folks here had a real problem with that, the busing issue.
Because you were campaigning for equality, not necessarily integration.
Right. As a matter of fact, one of my statements was that, black people didn't need integration. America needed it because America was lying to people all over the world, saying they're the melting pot, everything's beautiful, it's a lie. So we're saying that they don't need the integration. Black folks didn't need the integration. And one of the things that we saw back and going back to his grandfather, some of what we saw in it, that it was going to destroy a power base for the black community. And I told him at that point that, that this was in 1965, 66, what's going to happen is black teachers were going to lose their jobs. That was going to be the first thing that happened. And that they were going to take discipline out of schools because they're not going to allow black teachers to work with white children. But the black leadership really attacked me real bad for that because they believed that if blacks and whites were in the same school, the same class, they were going to learn the same way. And that was, again, another lie. And the black teachers that was teaching on the islands especially, but probably in District 20 also, had what they call a RON certificate, but that they didn't have an A certificate to teach school. And they paid them quite a bit less than they paid the teacher with the A certificate. And when some of the leaders finally realized that, they asked the school system to give these teachers about 2 years to upgrade themselves, and only maybe 10 or 12 teachers did that. So most of the teachers from that era lost their jobs. So those kinds of stuff are still not talked about in history, and the kind of stuff, because people just promoted ways how to make people suffer, and that was an ongoing thing. But it really hurt the black teachers, and that whole push towards the integration hurt the black economics. Because we had a time then when a dollar that a black guy make or a black woman make probably passed through 4 black hands before it went back to the white masses' hand. And with that whole integration movement, it put all of those things out of being. I tell a story that most of you that don't cook would not know what it means. But I went to the old black fella's restaurant right around in this area, and he was really upset about how people are letting the government know how much money they make. He said, don't understand how people can do that. He said, see, I sell grits, but nobody can tell me how many plate of grits I sell. Because grits swell up depending how much water you put in the pot while you cook it. So, but the government never had anything to do with what he made. And all of these men and women had a way that they were making a living with each other, fixing cars, whatever it took, houses and stuff like that. And that whole integration movement killed all of those things. That's why in Charleston, I think about 90% of the service station was owned by blacks, not renting. They owned the building and everything, or they bought from the folk with gas and oil. They don't own any of them today. All of them are gone. And we call it progress.
We call it progress. Yeah. Well, speaking of progress, the Progressive Club on Johns Island that you were involved with in the late 50s and early 60s, and they established a citizenship school program to educate men and women in the community to pass the South Carolina required literacy examination before you could qualify to register to vote. And the 1964 Civil Rights Act supposedly did away with unequal voter registration requirements, and then the the Voting Rights Act of 1965 supposedly abolished the literacy test. So did any of that legislation deflate what the Progressive Club was doing? Did it deflate any of that citizenship school education process that you were involved in?
No, it didn't, because again, when everybody talks about that, the Progressive Esau Jenkins started this teaching people how to read and write, and he was doing this back in 1948. And he's doing it on a bus that he used to bring some of us to Burke School. But he would ask people, why do you want to learn how to read and write? Why do you want to do this? And somebody would say, well, I got a daughter in New York, and I get letters, I can't read it. I want to know whether somebody's paying my taxes for me when I give them the money. Because we found out later that a lot of folks that were giving money to pay the taxes didn't pay it. Then they go back and claim the person's property and wait until they die, and at the end that the family don't own the property anymore. So they wanted to know how to make money orders, so all that. So it didn't start off where everybody got it at this particular time. It got it really as a help to people and how to learn how to get to register to vote, to read the part of the Constitution that you had to do. And Esau was such a leader there. In 1956, he ran for the school board in District 9 on John and Waterloo Island. There was not another election held for school board from 1956 to 1970. They just stopped having elections. And to this day, nobody can tell me how the hell they stopped having elections. But that's what they did. You know, and because of Esau running and the way that he was teaching. So in 1970 and 1968, when Stokely and them was on John Down with me, we sent a letter to the Senate committee that was handling the schools, and we told them that we wanted 3 blacks appointed to the school board, and we gave them the name of the 3 that we wanted, and we said that's exactly what we want. And what they did, this was 1968, they appointed Esau Jenkins to the school board, who ran in 1956. They appointed him in 1968, 12 years later. He had no children in school or anything, but they appointed him, and they appointed one of the guys that we wanted. And the reason they did it was pretty simple for me, was that I was a part of the thing, Stokely Carmichael and the Snake, and stuff like that. Esau was one of the organizers and founders of SCLC with Martin Luther King. He used to have Martin Luther King stay on John's Island with him. So what our government, state government did, they set it up so Esau Jenkins and I would have a fight, because he was totally nonviolent. I am now that they call me violent, all kinds of names. So that they knew that we would have a clash. And of course, I went to Mr. Esau and told him that, you know, that he was really wrong when he called me militant, because he was the most militant guy. He met with whites all over the place. Did so many stuff at night by himself. I said, you know, when I meet with people, I got 2 guys in the wood with guns, you know, trying to protect me. I was serious about it. I told the FBI that. You know, I wasn't brave like Esau and all of these folks. You know, and we were going to fight back if anybody did anything to us. And that made me an awful person and doing that kind of stuff. But again, Esau and I was able to come together and meet it, because he helped even with the hospital strike.
Well, speaking of the hospital strike of 1969, you were one of those people who, like you just said, you were advocating resistance and fighting fire with fire, and to get your point across and to make real progress, rather than sitting back and waiting for progress to happen in a slower fashion. So, in a sense, you were one of the more radical people in the Low Country, but do you think that the legislation of 1964 and subsequent federal laws, do you think that really gave your efforts more of a backbone? Do you think you would have had the kind of success in 1969 with the hospital strike? Would you have had that kind of success without the civil rights federal legislation?
Well, of course, again, I think we're talking about 2 separate things. With the hospital workers, when we organized the hospital workers in 1968 when we started, the state of South Carolina was refusing to pay minimum wage. And it said, like it always did, that it didn't come under the federal laws. They didn't have to pay. But, you know, minimum wage was $1.60, and they were paying, the state of South Carolina were paying $1.25. The city of Charleston paying $1 for sanitation workers. And that's how that came about. I think that what the Civil Rights Bill did, that it brought some folk into fighting for rights and stuff, and they would say that the law says such and such, so you got to deal with that. Yeah. That was a subsection of another group of people that really got involved with the whole civil rights issue. But I think the hospital strike really, again, was set up in a way that they were going to destroy me and everybody else with that. Because when they fired the 10 workers, they were looking for, and the lawyer that handled that from Greenville said that they fire those 10, and then you get all of them come back except those 10, and the problem is going away. Because with our motto with the hospital workers was an injury to one is an injury to all. So when they fired the 10, that means that they fired the all, and everybody was involved. So that's what brought the 100 days on the strike. But everybody started making minimum wage after that. And then, you know, the thing that is important for me is because talking about this stuff, it makes it so simple. You know, people like Mary Moultrie, who was a leader, I mean, she's sick today. Most of the people that made the sacrifice in that movement suffered. And very rarely we think about how much folk that made the sacrifice suffered for other people to have the kind of rights that they got. And we never really reach back and take a look at how we got to that point.
Well, and that's exactly why we're here today, to take that look back and to have an opportunity to thank people like you.
But you couldn't do what we were doing, most of us. You couldn't do what we're doing if you were worrying about dying. You couldn't do it if you were worrying about dying. You couldn't do it. Anybody that was afraid of dying couldn't be there. Matter of fact, a lot of young people that we were with was looking forward to dying at that point because they knew that was what was going to happen. So it's a different thing.
Right, and it would be tempting for younger people to look at the history books and say, okay, the federal government passed this legislation in 1964 that said schools have to be equal, that hotel accommodations have to be equal and open to everyone. But that doesn't necessarily mean it happened the next day in 1964. It was a generations of struggle, and it continues today.
Yeah, and not only that, to me, not only today, but going back to where it was in the 60s. I think the school system was really, and especially in Charleston County, I think it's just really going back to where it was back in the 60s.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, God. Hot Gap School was a high school was built for blacks, so they wouldn't have integration. Last year, they had no black teachers at Hot Gap School. They got segregated classes in Hot Gap School. I mean, you can check the record for that. After we start complaining about that involvement, then they hired 1 or 2 black teachers, and they got 1 or 2 black kids went into these all-white classes. But there's a segregated school system within this integrated school system that's going on all over the South.
And here in Charleston.
Especially in Charleston.
Especially in Charleston.
Yeah, Charleston is leader in all of those kinds of stuff. Because Charleston has always been so sophisticated in racism. So the way that they handle racism is a little different from the other folk that you would know exactly what they're doing. But Charleston's different. The way they do, you think you're okay.
Yeah.
Till you wake up and smell the coffee.
Yeah. So it's subtle, but it continues.
Yeah, to this day. Matter of fact, a lot of us looking at comparing. I do a lot of writing on my own, and I write that now and then and now, and they're both are coming back together. And the young black kids really don't have any knowledge of what is going on. And the black kids that their parents are the first group of black parents that came out of that bad school system to that forced integration. And so they're the one that's 40 now and got the kids. Back when I went to school, if you got in trouble at school, the teacher would be there on you. But you don't go home and tell your parents, because they're going to beat you again, because you have embarrassed the family. Now we got the parents go to the school to fight the teacher, because the kids are telling the truth. The kids lie all the time, but their kids don't lie. So they go and want to argue, want to fight the teacher. We got a serious problem that's not being addressed by anybody within the system itself, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, so like the saying goes, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and people like you are determined to be vigilant and to pass the torch along. And that's a powerful message that the fight still continues.
Freedom is not free. Freedom has never been free. And, that's one of the other reason I had a problem so much with the civil rights movement, because somebody has to give you civil rights, and that's nobody going to give you the right like that. We suffer and still suffer.
So I think I saw a hand up in the audience. I'm open to. Yes, sir. You have a question. I'll repeat the question.
I was just wondering, what was the school in Beaufort?
For me, Penn Center.
Penn Center?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Or you were talking about the Penn Center earlier, or Hot Gap.
I was talking Hot Gap, but Penn Center's in the school in Beaufort. Hot Gap is on Johns Island.
Dr. Cook, you have a question?
Buse. My grandfather came over from Daniel Island in 1920 to go to Buse. Buse at the time was an all-black school. And presently, Buse is an academy, Buse Academy for Advanced Studies. And I think it's less than 50 black students in that school right now, maybe 75. And so what Mr. Saunders is saying about Charleston being segregated is very true, but it also, like he says, it's sophisticated in its segregation.
So the example is Buste, a school just across the street from us, started out as a black school, and now in the 21st century it's predominantly white school.
Well, in the same way that this area is all black. My family lived all in this community.
So
My grandfather's shop was around the corner on Alexander Street. And my family lived up and down this street. My father and my grandfather had restaurants on Calhoun Street. And the number of black businesses in Charleston presently, you can count on two hands. And the number of black businesses west of Calhoun Street, you can count on two fingers, perhaps.
Well, so that's a good point. Let me go back to that. You were talking about this very neighborhood where we're located here on Calvin Street. It used to be a historically black neighborhood before the construction of the Gilliard Municipal Auditorium across the street, in which a number of houses were raised, some houses were moved, and really destroyed the neighborhood, destroyed the fabric of the community. And a similar example is the construction of the Crosstown, which is now called the Septima Clark Parkway or Highway. And that cut right through another neighborhood. And do you have any remembrance of that, or any particular anecdotes about the creation of the Crosstown in the late 1960s?
But the Crosstown was never, before them, the Crosstown is the same thing as the Gilliard Auditorium. They ran that Crosstown straight across a very affluent black neighborhood, all the way out to Spring Street. Spring Street, we had hotels on Spring Street, all kinds of restaurants and business, and that Crosstown cut out all of those businesses. And none of those things happened accidentally. It was predetermined. You know, this thing with the school system, for instance, when we try to get blacks on the school board on Johns Island, John Baltimore Island, what the power to be decided right at that point when we did that they had to come up with a way to make sure that blacks doesn't have any power in the school system. And there was about 7 school boards, and 5 of those school boards, after it was elected, would have had blacks as the majority on those boards. So we had one good senator with a good, nice plan, and what he did, he came up with the consolidated school board. And when he put that together, it means that there were not going to be any blacks, basically, with any power within that system. And when they put it together, they started with the lie that all they wanted to do, which made sense, that they, when there was some money someplace in Washington, we had 7 or 8 superintendents going to Washington. If they had the consolidated school board, where all you need is one person. And that all of the power of the school system was going to remain with these constituent school boards. And that was the lie that they told for about 15, 20 years. Now those constituent boards have no power, nothing. They can deal a little bit with expansion of kids getting put out of school. That's all. But that board used to hire all of the teachers, got the tax money, and all of those kinds of stuff. And when that consolidated board took out all of that power, and it's the only one in the country that you took one board and set them on top of another 7 boards. And then it's the only one around Charleston that's at large. So you can't, the minorities or anyone can't get on that board unless you're already sold your soul already. And if you haven't, then you can't be there. I could never be there.
Well, it's a powerful message that here in the low country of South Carolina, there have been so many ways to get around the federal laws imposed to break down these barriers. And that continues for many, many years.
It's going to continue to happening has been people. Right now, the kind of leadership within the black community or poor community is really not having access to education or any kind of stuff. And they make them fight among themselves about football or basketball or some stuff that has nothing to do with changing lifestyles and those kind of stuff. And they take the best football or basketball player and they make them like they're some heroes or some big genius. So they can do any bad thing they want to and get away with it. I used to be in the radio business. I used to do editorials against football and basketball players. I spread my life one time for the editorial, that position I was taking. But it just, to me, you needed a degree. And you're good to play the sport, but you needed something that you can get a job after you get hurt in the system. Again, the only place that's doing that somewhat is the city. It is the most racist institution in Charleston a long time ago. But again, it's the place that I would stand right now, because they're making sure kids got to learn it before they can play sports. All the other schools that just do.
Education is always important.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to that. Charleston and South Carolina in general has been really good at a leader in continuing its racism and its prejudice, and you suggest that it still exists, and it does indeed. We do it with code words now, but it's out there. But I want to go back to, you were the leader. You brought, one of the things that really has impressed me is that you brought great change. And where I'm headed with this is who's out there now? You suggest that the problem exists in the schools, and it does. But aren't there some young folks out there that are going to carry the torch?
It's very hard, and I don't want you to say that I brought around any changes. But I got a different word for that. I brought around with a lot of other brothers some improvement.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed. And nothing has changed. There's been some improvement, which is going back the other way. And it's very hard. I got 10 children, 18 grandchildren. I got 10 children, all kind of funny degrees. Engineering and all kinds of stuff. But a couple of them don't even know Dr. King is dead. So the problem is, they're missed because of not being taught by blacks and folk that within the community. I tell my kids all the time, I don't have a degree, but I'm educated. Because I got educated by people that I could sit by his grandfather and other folk. And all you had to do, they didn't let you say nothing. But all you had to do was listen. And you learn. And they made men and women. But we don't have any of the young folk that have access now to that kind. And they believe that they can do everything themselves. And if it's not on that little thing that they're playing with, it's not happening. I got a couple of them, I got to tell them it's raining. Because the thing didn't say it was raining. And that's where the problem exists. And so many of the black parents are so proud of their children, they will not say anything or do any forceful thing. But if we don't begin to do something about the whole education system, when I talk about the black kids, the same thing happened with the white kids and the white parents that I'm close to. They have the same problem that I have.
We just don't fund it.
So we have to come up with a better way. Yes, sir?
Mr. Saunders, you say there's been improvement, but there hasn't been change.
Yes.
And so the question that comes up in my mind, and I'm going to ask this in all naivete, although I think I know what you mean. But where do you draw the line? What constitutes improvement? What constitutes change? And where over the course of a half century do you feel improvement has gotten a foothold and made some difference in the lives of black people, white people?
Where's the line between improvement and change?
Well, that's a classroom question, but again, the kinds of stuff that have happened to make life easier for folk, it's where that happened. We talk about, in my religion, change. You stop from your drinking and all that other kind of stuff. You change personally, and you're in another world almost. But the improvement, when your enemy controls what kind of improvement, how much you're gonna have, there's a problem there. And I keep talking about this, but I don't want to make it all that it's all a racial thing. You know, I got into the radio business in 1970 because of the hospital strike. It caused some stuff that happened. But the white fathers put together the Communication Act of 1934. And two of the teeth in those things were, number one, no lawyers would be able to advertise. Number two, no doctors would be able to advertise. Now the driving force with the Reagan administration and so forth, they got rid of that rule. So, you know, Bill Green right now and the other guy they're making fools of our community. They're telling folk, go and have an accident. Come to me, I'll get you your money. You know, do something to somebody, we'll save you. And those are some of the most detrimental ads that are being run today. Because we got so many poor people, uneducated folk that are really saying, if I can just get ran over a little bit, I can get me some money. And we got to, as a community, we're going to have to stop those kind of stuff. That Bill Green thing is just, you know, as well anyway.
Amen, amen. Glad I asked.
Drive me back to drinking up.
We take a question from Minerva.
Of course, we have many battles on many fronts to fight, but the one thing, and perhaps it's because I'm in the local school system, I'm a librarian at St. John's High School, which is the only high school on Johns Island. And our feeder school, of course, is Hoyt Gap, and I can certainly attest to what Mr. Saunders has said. Up to this year, there were no black teachers at Hoyt Gap. There aren't many more now, just two. But I think if of all the things we need to concentrate on, is one of them, the most crucial ones, is the problem of the disappearing black teacher. We are now entering our second generation of students, black and brown students, who have not been exposed to black teachers. And it really shows. Case in point, just 2 days ago, last week, I'm sorry, as a part of our Black Heritage program, I had Henry Darby, county councilman, come and do a wonderful presentation. He's a former social studies teacher at Burke High School. And he did a beautiful PowerPoint presentation, which was titled, Murdered Civil Rights Workers. And time after time again, he asked our students, and we had sophomores, juniors, seniors, to identify some of the people in the PowerPoint. And our students didn't know, had never heard of the 4 little girls in Birmingham who had been killed. They didn't know about the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi who were killed. They didn't know who Medgar Evers was. They didn't know anything. I think maybe a couple of them out of the whole library had heard of the Orangeburg Massacre. And this is a result of students who are not being taught by people who have a vested interest in their education or perpetuating or teaching them about their heritage, their history. And it's really, really, really sad. And I don't know what we're going to do about it, but I think that's where we need to start, remedying that problem.
So
Now, with every black teacher who leaves my school, that person is usually replaced by a young white teacher. Now, does that say that all young white teachers are not effective? That's not what I mean to say. But let's face it, nobody is going to tell our story. Nobody's going to tell your story as effectively as you are, because you're the one who has a vested interest in telling that story and perpetuating the history. And it really is a very, very
So we need-
sad. And by the way, I've got to tell you, and I have a question for you, Bill. I was the plaintiff in the Brown versus Board of Education District 20 case, the local case. So maybe I'm to blame, I don't know. But the point is, if we had any idea in the 1950s that school integration would have turned out so badly, I think we would have left it alone. Because after all, as you said, the struggle was for equality, not integration. And I don't know, is that where we need to be going now, Bill?
Yep.
Going back to a segregated system that gives us some degree of identity of who we are and what we are?
So let me just repeat that question for the audience that
Okay.
didn't hear it. So in order to address that problem, do we need teachers who have that voice of experience to pass on to the next generation? Would that require some kind of segregation now?
Well, I don't know. I think that we have to get some folks to take a look at it. But we really very rarely mention the poor white kids. And that has to be a part of the equation. I grew up on Johns Island around a whole lot of poor whites. And folk talked about it, and the blacks, we get involved in losing our lands and we fight, but we do a pretty good job. I don't see one of those poor white families that I grew up around that's there today. But we think that we get mad at the white people because white folk took their property. You know, some of us from the island, the moment that we see a fence go up, we know that we got some strangers on that because nobody ever knew who owned the land when I grew up. Everybody had access to the land. But anytime somebody from Boston or someplace buy a piece of land, they put the house around it. So the problem is that how do we begin to get back to the teachers, white and black teachers back in the day, were dedicated, they were like ministers. You know, it was not about the money. It was about how many kids that I could help, who I could point to. But I got a grandson there, and he's 14, he's 6'2", and he gets mistreated so much. He's been put out of school 2-3 times. The teacher called him a thug in the classroom. You know, and I went there to the school a couple of times, so they sort of changed the attitude a little bit. But they got him messed up because these young teachers, white teachers, are not able, and they feel threatened by someone, even like my tall grandchild. But your question is the one that needs to be addressed. We have to come up with a way to have equal education for everybody. And even the Hispanic now are going to have to be a part of that equation for Charleston County.
First, your question. For me, change and what's the other one? Improvement, yes. Just that facet. I would say that I was able to improve my life and went to the University of Florida and got a Ph.D. in anthropology. But I come back to Charleston, which is my home, and didn't find change here because I couldn't get full-time employment at the College of Charleston, even with my Ph.D. The best I could get is an adjunct position. Okay, so that hadn't changed. Okay, and the racial population at the College of Charleston continued to be 6% of the student body at the College of Charleston is of African descent. 6%. Okay, in I teach a course on Gullah burial traditions. Gullah, African descended people. I have a class of 17 students. None of them are African American. And one of my students is Japanese. Okay, to speak to what my sister was saying. Now, if I had my druthers and the resources, I would take my PhD and so many other people who look like me who have PhDs that are unemployed, and I would start a school and do the work that we say that needs to be done to raise the self-esteem of our children, first of all. Okay? Because I dropped out of school when I was in the 6th grade. Dropped out. Because I didn't want to be hassled by the system anymore. All of my teachers were largely white. And I was accused of being all kinds of things, including stupid. I dropped out. But I didn't believe them. I knew better. That's why I have a Ph.D. I decided to teach myself and to sit at the feet of people like Bill Saunders and so many others. As he sat at my grandfather's feet, he said he didn't have an education, but he's educated. My grandfather had a 6th grade education. Philip Simmons. If you Google the city of Charleston, you'll see Philip Simmons' picture come up and not Mayor Rowley's.
So what can we do to inspire that drive to educate yourself? What, in younger people, what can we do to inspire that drive?
Oh, we are not, because Ms. Brown raised the question that I did with a black audience a couple of weeks ago with Reverend Dawson Memorial. And I told the audience, and it was basically a black audience, about 60 and above, I said, first we have to take the responsibility that we made a mistake. I made a mistake with my own children because I believed my wife did the cooking for Dr. King, you know, Stokely Carmine, stayed in my house. I didn't know my kids knew what was going on. I didn't have to teach them nothing. But I was wrong. They missed the whole thing. You know, so we have to, our 60s and above, Ms. Brown, we got to go back and take another look. We're trying to do something at my church, for instance, right now, brother, is to get with kids that between the ages of 8 and 10 or 12. Because normally if they're 17 or 18, we done lost it. So we have to get at a lower age and try to work on all of those stuff you said that if we had the money. We have to come up with a way to do that. Because those, if we can get just a good group of those, they will teach the others. We don't have to do the teaching. They will do the teaching. But they're going to have to be very fully equipped. And our political system don't want that to happen. Our political system is structured to make sure that that don't happen. You know, I mean, the number of African Americans that's in jail right now in South Carolina is unbelievable. You know, and I myself been in jail 5 times, never broke the law. They had locked me up and said my muffler wasn't good. I've been in jail under the Cooper River Bridge because the cops said I didn't dim my lights. They said something was wrong with my inspection sticker. I've been in jail because it said something wrong with my tires. I mean in jail, not getting a ticket. You know, everything that could happen to me happened to me during that system. And now if you go look to check my record, there's no record that I ever been arrested. Only my government can do that. Nobody could expunge somebody's record without the government doing it. And I got about 8 or 10 people that were still around, that was alive when it was me when I went to jail. But as soon as the few of us died, my record would be clean. You know. And I went to the last judge I went before. I said, you know, I gotta be treated like a common criminal because I haven't done anything against my country. And everything I fought for was to be free and to help people. But that IRS takes every nickel I make today. Now they start taking my Social Security. And they got a way to do it. And then I got blacks who comes mad at me because I'm mad at IRS and I think the Tea Party been doing a good job. They say that you can't be on the side of the Tea Party. But I grew up with a group of white men in the city, especially some black men, and they did was one way. You were either right, brother, or you were wrong. They were Republican, they were Democrat, they were Independent. They did was, are you right or you wrong? And if you were right, they would go with you. You know, and I didn't need to go to anybody's house and all that kind of stuff. But that's what we're gonna have to really begin to deal with, and it's gonna take a good group like this that are being willing to make some sacrifice, but also to come up with some money that to make some of these things work. Because the whole idea of what's happening to Johns Island, or this, what has happened to the city of Charleston. The city of Charleston had projects where people grew up, but they had a little place where they did a little farming. I mean, a lot of our middle class grew up in those projects. And then after Joe Wright and them sort of took over, they made it something else, a slum system, you know, and go and check to see whether a man in the house 2 o'clock in the morning, those kind of stuff. And that's going on today. You know, and they used to lock up black men to and put them on the farm. They had the county farm up there, with all the county office buildings. That's was a farm. My friends, sometimes I see them be walking home at night. I don't see them for another 10 days. They was on the prison farm. They had them working. You know, and you can't find no way under this law that South Carolina or Charleston has ever done anything wrong to anybody. Everything that South Carolina and Charleston have done has been perfect. Looking up for everybody. Me and Riley sent a birthday card to some of the senior citizens, and you go to some place for some kids and hold them up or something. And that's what it takes. But it has nothing to do with some progress or people being able to use the talent that they got. Because you got to be like the brother there or me to go through it. Because most of the young people I know, or even that I came up with, at a certain point you give up. You could fight, and you turn against yourself. And the thing that scares me the most was that I keep going back to the system. But anyway, you know, it's something that causes young black people especially on themselves, and they don't mind like I was when I was much younger. They don't mind dying. They don't have a problem with dying because they have no hopes. And if you can't create some hope in people, they're just as dangerous to you as they are to themselves. Because nobody's life is important to them. And the police department right now, they got the stuff in this morning paper that the crime rate is down. Yeah, because they go around harassing the community folk. On James, I got all kind of complaint. But I mean, guys can't walk the street or the road because over there most of the time. But the cops are stopping them all. And then tell them, well, we want you to tell us who the next 5 people around here selling drugs. And if you don't come back and tell us in a week, you go into jail. And if they say something about the drug deal, they can get killed. And if they don't, they go to jail like one of them just did Monday, Tuesday. And that's important. That's Sheriff Cannon, the park. You know, when the cops killed that guy the other day, they're throwing something at him, at them, 2 cops shot somebody 7 times. And the sheriff said, they had a right to kill him, because he shouldn't have thrown nothing. You know, that was far away from somebody. So we're talking about what I started with my life back in the 50s. We're talking about human rights. Everybody should be able to be treated as a human being. And it should be able to feel comfortable. And that their government actually want them to do better, want them to do right, want their children to do well. But our state, our county government, both the county government and the North Charleston government and Charleston government, all the same. One big group. Anything that they can get away with, they get away with. And people are suffering. You know, talking to you all tonight, they're going to do something else to me, but that's okay. You know, there's very much more they can do to me because they take everything that I got. Yes, sir. Let's see you. Yes.
You mentioned earlier something that is very prominent in my thinking, which is that Martin Luther King was assassinated at the very point when his own change of heart, which was not away from passive resistance, but it was more towards lower paid working people. He was really trying to recruit white people in the Midwest, and that's why he was in Memphis to join his movement. And that never caught hold. And it was always something that, of course, I was a mere tad at the time, but it was always something that I thought, that was just a hell of an idea. That is something that would work.
But that's why he was killed. See, if you could accept the fact that, our government set up the fight between the black Muslim and the Ku Klux Klan. They wanted those two groups, radical, and say all kind of negative things about them, and they fight each other. And I look at both groups were poor, had no power in the government or anything, but it's good for them to fight. And that is still going on today. If they can set up a methodology, and I used to go, another dumb thing that I used to do. I used to go to Klan's rally, Ku Klux Klan rally on John Valley. And then there were 4 guys.
Did they know you were there?
Yeah, we stood out to make sure they know we were there. But they were talking about, how awful the niggas and what they're doing and the Jews and what we got to do with them. But I knew them, the kids didn't even have shoes. They weren't getting the proper, none of it. All it was about that talking. And they could do something violent to a person. But that's all. They couldn't help nobody. Give nobody no job or anything. They just were venting. I got some of them now that comes to me and says, Mr. Saunders, one of the things that I admire with you guys, I wish we got involved before, it said, because, y'all got the NAACP and all this black organization that work with you. We don't have anything. Only thing we ever have is the Klan, and that was of noted value. And I used to tell them that, the person that's your enemy is the governor, especially the Attorney General, and that don't go over well with the Attorney General and them. But that's a fact. We all are suffering from the same thing, whether you're Tea Party or Republican or Democrat. If you believe in people, if you believe in fairness, then you're suffering for the same thing. We have to come up with a better way to do something with our political system in the elective process. And what Mayor Riley and some of the folks in North Charleston have done is they got folk to the point that they believe that there's no reason to vote. They will tell you that if Joe Riley wanted, Joe Riley gonna get it. And I'm not talking about blacks, I'm talking about blacks and white that I'm dealing with. Feel the same way that if Joe Riley wants it, road across John's Island, Joe can get it. And I'm saying they have to kill a few more of us, but they believe that he's going to get a road across John's Island. And so this group needs to have a beginning in terms of dealing with right and wrong. Have nothing to do with race to that level. Have nothing to do with it, but all of this other stuff. Because with the civil rights movement that you've been raised with, the folk that have benefited more out of the civil rights movement have been white women. White women have got more rights out of that movement. I watch news and they meant that 3 or 4 white women and maybe a white man or a black, but they've been able because they were ready to do it. And so many of my supporters doing back in the late 50s and 60s were white women, young women. And they could type, they had their own car, they had their own interests. And they were willing to stand for stuff. And that's how it happened that way. They had nothing to do with some stuff that folk would like to make up. But they were the one that had their lives and stuff on the line. They were able to make a difference. Because a lot of us would not have made it. It was for some of those white women, the young women that was at Vista and a whole lot of those organizations that came on to want to help people to get registered to vote, to help with the healthcare system and all of that. But no history records that. Because that would not be something to use against somebody. But if they can make somebody mad at white people because they got the job, then that would work. If you get some Hispanic or black women mad, want to fight them for that. That is a place that we're talking about being able to do what is right. I tell people all the time, I'm a true believer in God, and I am a follower of Jesus. And what that means is that if you're a follower of Jesus, then you're going to take some chances. See, the government killed Jesus. And a lot of us don't want to deal with that. The government killed John the Baptist. You know, that's who killed him. And the Pharisees, who were supposed to, the Bible says that, you know, people suffer for the lack of knowledge. The folk that were supposed to give them the knowledge were the Pharisees. They wouldn't educate. They wouldn't educate the folk. And that's where we are right now. So many of us got the knowledge, but keeping the knowledge. We ain't gonna tell nobody about it.
So you're a libertarian.
Huh?
So you're a libertarian.
I don't mess with those labels at all, sir. I believe in what is right and what is wrong, and I put my life on the line for that. But when you start segregating yourself into some of those holes, you can lose it, unless you really got some other goals with it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I live on, I've lived here 16 years. I'm from up north, so change and improvement, I can kind of understand and appreciate some of the things you're mentioning to look at it as an outsider. And I live on James Island, or as I call it, Joe's Island. In theory, Joe Riley maybe someday won't be mayor of the city of Charleston anymore. If and when that happens, do you see the potential for somebody getting that job that could help with some of these improvements you're talking
So,
about?
In the
In theory,
sometime future, we'll have
in theory,
a
he won't
replacement for
live
Joe
forever.
Riley. Do you think things will
Whether he
change?
runs forever, he won't live forever.
Do you think there's,
Yeah, but I think the question, you would have to redo that question, because what all of these political leaders and folk do, they choose who's going to replace them. And somebody's already sort of been chosen who's going to replace Joe Riley. You know, and that's what makes it so bad.
And that person is somebody that won't change anything for the better?
No, well, you couldn't have. I mean, he's been with Joe the whole time.
Okay.
You know, and they might probably have a better public relation. But the stuff would be that you gotta be somebody brand new, somebody that's willing to take the whole system on and put everything that they got on the line. You know, and don't try to butt up to anybody but to help people. You know, you take a look at all of these areas, and it's a shame. Somebody mentioned the College of Charleston. I had one of my daughters went to the College of Charleston in the early 70s, and nobody suffered in the school system as much as my daughter. She used to cry from that school. I used to be on Martyr Street. She would cry and come to my home, but been mistreated with the professors and stuff. And they would call her names and talk about me. You know, I met Ted Stern, who was a beautiful guy. And I went to Ted because my daughter wanted to get out, and I went to ask him. You know, he said, "No, let her stay. I'll make sure that she stays." And we were able to get her to finish. And it's a good school for education. She got a degree in math and got a master's from the Medical University. But to this day, she's in her 50s and she's still bitter. And she can't go back to that school. And anything there, she can't go there. So they crippled her. You know, for the rest of her life, she got crippled there. You got to stop that from happening. We've got to come up with a way to stop that from happening.
And if Glenn McConnell gets appointed president,
Huh?
I said if Glenn McConnell gets appointed president, it'll just
Well,
reverse.
that's not going to happen. You know, that's one of the places that I got the worst. I ran for the state senate in 1980. Glenn McConnell beat me in the general election. I can give you a copy of the article. Glenn said I was a communist, a socialist, and violent, and had a friend like Stokely Carmichael. He had the whole support of the Ku Klux Klan and that other stuff that he does, selling those paraphernalia and stuff like that. But he called it me name. And there's no way in the world we could allow Glenn McConnell to be president of the College of Charleston. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes.
Just two other things. I'm not objective. The reason we came here is because my husband got a job there, but the first time I walked on campus, I said to my husband, I'm from New Jersey, so take that with a grain of salt or whatever. The first thing I said was, where are the people that look like her? You know, just walking around campus thinking this is Charleston, South Carolina, and it's 16 years later, and there's a few more people that look like you, but not too many. So I hope you're right. I hope
Well, you
that's
know,
it.
and the College of Charleston, like the Medical University, all of the expansion of both of those institutions was on black communities. All of the properties around the College of Charleston was on Medical University, where black people used to live. Well, in 1975 or 70, when we had the hospital strike, the city of Charleston was about 73-75% black. Now less than 20%.
And
And going down.
the only other thing I want to say, and I don't usually speak publicly, so this came up for me, is I was born in '61, so I sort of remember the '60s, and what you're saying about white women benefiting, I just want to thank you and thank you, because I understand some of what you're saying about things not getting better, but your work helped me go to college and have opportunities and get a decent paying job, and my ancestors as well, but thank you.
See, I wasn't, I'm just about 80 and I got a lot of mileage on it. But if I had the leadership of some of my friends on the front seat here, I would really go after organizing women. Women could elect the president of this country without having one male vote. Now, they don't need one male vote, they're total majority in the country. But they allow the enemies to make them fight about dumb stuff. When in fact, just a good organization, they could change the country. They can make the country what it needs to be. That's what we need. But I'm not going to live that long. Yes, John.
This is sort of, are you done with all your questions, or is it open question?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Two questions. The first is, I think the College of Charleston has expended a great amount of energy trying to increase racial diversity, and it's absolutely failed in the past few years. It's still at, I think, either 6 or 8% African American. Besides bringing in more black teachers, are there any other solutions that you think could help address that problem in the college?
So how can we improve the
I think
racial diversity at the college?
Yeah, again, we're going to have to deal with the leadership. Wade, I don't know how many of you know about McLeod Plantation, where all the soldiers, black soldiers died, and that building over there. 2 years ago, the College of Charleston had an option on to buy that property in the building. And a group of us from the Gullah Geechee Commission asked the leaders of there to meet us over there. And they were talking, and one of the commissioners asked them, said, what are you going to do with the property? And the lawyer said, we're going to build a ball field.
Yeah.
We're going to build a ball field on that historical property. And one of our commissioners said, that will never happen. He said, this is a sacred ground. You will never play ball over here. And of course, that's how they sort of back out, and Benson has some change of heart. Because we said, all of this property, where all of the serious farming took place, why can't we teach farming young people on how to grow stuff and let our kids know that food grow and it don't come from supermarket? All of this stuff could be done, but not expensive at all. But all of the stuff that could be done on that property, they want another ball field. The College of Charleston. It's unbelievable. I'm not never speechless. That took me out. I couldn't even respond to that. That they've been planning to take that property, and they will tear down the buildings, I guess, the slave cabin and all that stuff, and just play ball. So the college got a problem. And I don't know what you're saying, young man. It's just that I wouldn't want any young black students and stuff to go over there just to suffer. I am saying from now on within the black community, if anybody needs to suffer, some of us older people need to carry that burden. Not to go there to prove and get beat up and get mentally messed up over the years. We need to be able to change that without the students, young, black, or any student suffering at the College of Charleston. Right now, it's structured it's a misnomer that they're trying to do all of the stuff that you say. Because I met with some of them over there. That's not the issue. They want a good public relation part to say, hey, this is what we've been trying to do. Because they got people over there that could do that if they had an interest in that. Dr. Powell and all of those guys, they could do that if they had the range or the right to do what they do.
And it hasn't worked because the school hasn't become more diverse either in the faculty or in the student body. The numbers support it very much.
You got a secret board that runs Sergeant College Charles. You got a board, and then you got a board from the Confederacy. You got the board down there that tell everybody else what to do. Anybody else? We've used up a lot of time.
You had another question.
Did you have a?
Go ahead, what's your question?
I was wondering if you had any really standout memories from the hospital workers strike, beyond what you've shared already. It's just a really fascinating part of the Charleston's history of segregation and
You know,
discrimination.
there was so many things that I was lucky to be a part of, but being able to provide the protection, and I talk about the Jackson Street Panthers, they were the one that really provided protection for the hospital workers. And we were able to change those Jackson Street Panthers guys. Now, one of them is a minister today. That whole thing changed where he was, but he was a guy that would stand up for what was going on. We had, Ms. Moultrie that was just outstanding in taking chances. Even when the police chief locked me up from over there, for no reason, I was just standing out there one Sunday evening. But one of my memory of that is that I was the spokesman all the time. And they took us to jail and put us in underground jail with no windows or no nothing. And for the first time, I had nothing to say. And it really, that paranoia or all that confinement really really got me. And I just sat there. And two guys that had been with me for 2 years almost, one of them started telling jokes. And he got all kinds of funny jokes. And then another guy who's still around started singing. And some of the beautifulest voice you ever heard was with about 22, 23 men underground, because I can't sing. But, and they did such a beautiful job, and they were so happy in jail that the folk, just like in the Bible, came, opened up the doors, turned us and put us in a nice lighted cell that we spent the rest of the night in. But go ahead, sir.
So I came to the Medical University in 1978, and it wasn't until 20 years after that, there had always been rumblings about the strike, and been very, very quiet, repressed. Nobody said anything about it. 20 years later, maybe even 25, came to light. There's a tape, or they made videos of everything, and of you, and they repressed that for the longest of times. But now, I'll bet it's available.
Ken, I don't know anything about it. Y'all need to try this and see it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. So you're saying that MUSC has audio and video of surveillance of the hospital workers?
It needs to be in the archive.
I don't know where it's archived, but
We'll find out. We'll find out.
There is the video the library has called I Am Somebody that's
Yeah.
Oh, that's, yeah, that, yeah, I
If you
know
haven't
that,
seen
that,
it.
that is something different.
Yeah, that's a
That's
documentary, I Am Somebody.
That young lady, you had a question?
Yes, sir. Coming from African American family, my grandmother, she was instrumental in the Orangeburg massacre, so it made an impact on me. How do we promote this to the new generations that it is relevant to them? Because I really think, because I am a single mother too, when they sit and talk with Granny, they understand that. But from outside the household, how do you explain to other children that this is relevant to you and this is where you came from, basically?
How you pass on that legacy to the next generation.
And that is the question that we still wrestling with. But I've been able to, and you can do it too. If you can just take a few of the kids. I don't deal with, this is probably the largest group I would deal with. I've never dealt with a real big group of people. But if you're going to help people, and you got 5 or 6 kids, something that interests them, that's what you did with it. I did, when I was organizing the hospital workers, I studied Denmark Vesey. And what I decided to do, because what he tried to do, he tried to organize all of the slaves. And that basically what got him killed, and the rest of them. So what I decided to do was to reverse his strategy. So when I'm doing the hospital workers and everything I've done ever since, I never had over 7 or 9 people that was involved in the inner circle of knowing what was going on. And then we could always get the information back to the masses. And even out of that 7 or 9, 2 of them didn't even know the other 7. Because you can't tell on something you ain't know nothing about. But when everybody's involved in making decisions, everybody wants to have the last word or to say it. And stuff used to happen, and we would see some guys the next day and meet them in the street. They would say, this is what we did last night. And they had nothing to do with it. And they would lie because they just want some gratification. But you got to take your time with them. And if you're going to do it because you want to feel good or make folks recognize you, don't. You got to do it because it's the right thing to do, and it helps. I go for 2 things for myself: some peace and some joy. And both of those things I can give to myself, because both of those things come from within. Folks will be happy. You can get some crap and get happy. But if you really want to deal with some happiness in your own self, go from the inside. And no matter what anybody says, you knew that you did the best you could. That's all God or anybody ever wanted, the best you could. And you can feel good about that. It doesn't matter whether anything come out of it at that point. Because so many things that are happening with me right now that I would never imagine happen. Because, I've been made a bad person. All my life I've been treated in my political life and my business life, I've been treated as a monster and a bad person. Never had a fight. I had 2 brothers that liked to fight all the time. I would go with them, they could fight and they would brag and they would brag you up and stuff, but they feel like they want to fight. I just didn't believe in that. I didn't need to do any of that. And that's why a lot of times, then, if I had a few little fights, I would knock you first. Because I was scared. See, if you would come out of my face, I'll knock you first. And then your bet don't fall. Because I step on you too. I mean, that was back in the day. Now you're all ultra religious folk, but yeah, because you don't take a chance to get beat up. And I never bothered anybody. You had a question, sir? No, you.
No.
Okay, I thought you had anybody else? Anybody else?
I came late. I thought it was starting later, and I apologize. I must have missed an awful lot, and I'm sorry. But I feel there's got to be something we could do. We just can't say, oh, well. And I think a lot of times people go, oh, well, and one of the first things that everybody needs to do is to vote. Not just for the president, not just for the governor, but every vote, even for dog catcher, whatever, vote, because that's power. And people don't realize we have that basic power, and we're not using it. And things aren't happening because we're not using that power.
I agree. I totally agree with you. What I do with my agency that we didn't mention, we do political education. Because I find that within the black or white community, they have no idea what a senator does, what a House of Representatives does, or what a city council versus a county council. So we teach us all of that. And so you're right about, and we got to tell people again that when we started in the black community with the voting, they used the leadership, like Esau Jenkins, they would tell folks, this is like farming. Voting is like first planting the seed. But what you got to do is you got to cultivate it, you got to do all kinds of stuff with it, unless an animal or somebody mess it up. But most folks vote today and they want to harvest. The moment the person got elected, they want something happen that should have happened. And you got to give them some time. And that's why to me the political education, man, I totally agree with you. But we also got to do a lot more political education with folks. Just voting is not going to give you no instant gratification. You have to make sure that it works. You got to make sure that the person that you vote for, you can go back at him or her and say, what are you doing? We're not doing any of those kind of things. And if you get to that point, it could be exciting. You don't have to be boring, or it could be exciting. But if you get a new group of people that start, and then you raise a question The young lady raised the question, but I see you being here tonight started that process. Because you're now going to go and think some more about what can you do and how could you do it. Yes, ma'am.
You know, another thing too, I'm first generation American, so you have to understand where I'm coming from. But I don't understand the different kinds of history. The black experience for so long has got to be treated as the American experience, because that has all reflected on everything that goes forward, good, bad, or indifferent. So it must be taught at any level.
Yeah. That's
And it has to be the American experience.
Yeah, but that's our struggle, and that fits into him and the director of the library, because the reason that we have Black History, first started with Black History Week, the reason that we have that and not a month, because Black history is not a part of the American history. Black history is not a part of South Carolina history. So what we're trying to do now is to do what you say, begin to get it to be a part of the American history and South Carolina history, but it's not inclusive. If you go to South Carolina, even Charleston history, you put one or two black persons that did something that they figured it might be nice enough. But we have to go and get it to be a part of the American history. That the black and the Hispanic and everybody, the people look at the Mexicans. The Mexicans get treated so bad, but America's still a part of Mexico. You know, nobody won't talk about that. California, Texas, all kinds of places where the Mexicans were and lost their land. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just wanted to reflect back on the 50 years from the civil rights, because I think the reflection I have in thinking about this, because at that age I was in my early 20s, and when the Civil Rights Act passed, I as a woman felt liberated, because it covered me, and the first experience was my applying for a job and the superintendent of the school saying, well, we want to hire a man. And with that law, I was able to say, you can't do that anymore. I am qualified and you need to consider me as a candidate. And I think that that's part of it, is that we also have to assert our rights, our human rights. And if we don't speak up for ourselves and we don't speak up for our children's rights, then we miss a golden opportunity to take that law that was put into place and make it play out as it was intended to do. That's my reflection.
You did a good job of that, and that's right on. You know, and sexism is still a live thing. I tell people a lot of times, I'm a sexist. I got to fight myself. You know, I go to lunch with two women, you know, and they both got more money than me, but I feel like I got to pay for the food. You know, that's sexism. Because
Double standard.
Yeah, I mean, so any time I got to check with myself to deal with that. I used to be around guys, and you know, on Johns Island, we had some women over there used to beat up men all the time. You know, I mean, physically, you know. So, but again, men would always feel those kind of stuff, and it's an ingrained thing, and you gotta. And that's why I think with racism, like we say, you got to realize that you are, and then you can deal with it. You know, but if you don't accept, oh, I'm not sexist or I'm not racist, you got to get past that and check your own self. Say, hey, you know, this I'm going to do. Right? You know, I have to see some of the women now with driving 18 wheels. I mean, it's such a beautiful sight. You know, and we still say, wow, look at her. But those are the kinds of stuff that has come out of that. I'm hoping that women continue to use that right to help other people, because I think that women have the best chance to do that. Yes, sir.
I agree with what you say and you're right, but I got to speak up for white men, because I don't want to make white men the enemy. And because I remember Martin Luther King coming to Montreat in 1936, and talking to the white community that this was the right thing. And I think you lose your whole thing when you start dividing women against men, black against white, Democrat against Republican. And I think you've got it right on to do the right thing. And I think that's what Martin Luther King was doing, that woke up the white community in the 50s.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but again, the folk that control everything in this country today, in this state, are white male. And so we try not to label that, but any place that they have real power, you know, with all of the corporation, all of the stuff that are really doing so much of the environment. You know, I look at Bloomberg from New York, you know, how somebody could be a multi-billionaire, you know, how can you make that kind of money without ever taking advantage of a whole lot of people? So I try to make sure that I stay on top of stuff with that when I'm talking to even other group of people. But anywhere that I go right now, 5 or 6 white male control, whatever it is. And I'm hoping that that is one of the things that we're going to work on changing. Anytime that I see a woman or a black in charge or in front of something, like when BP did the stuff in the Gulf the other day, then they got a white woman to come up and say, BP is the greatest company. Then they got a black girl to be back to work now. No. BP, a white male, needed the guy that was in charge of that. Said he was really upset because they've been interfering with his cricket game. You know, he said that publicly, and they moved him from out there. Then they began to hire, and if you look at all the ads now about BP, is a white woman or a black man or a black woman, because no white man does that, and then using folk in those kind of ways. I'm hoping we can get to the place that I'm talking about and that you're thinking about, that we all become that one. But at this particular stage, you know, Joe Riley, if I got to go back, because Joe and I been the best of friends for many years. But even when he ran for governor, and we were trying to get him to talk about blacks in business, and he came out that blacks have business. You know, I created 150 jobs for them. He had no idea the difference between having a job and owning a business for blacks. He knew it for white male and all that, but he knew that the 150 jobs was all the black community needed. So there is an education process that we will have to engage on, and I think that keep coming out of this thing tonight. There got to be an education thing, and if we can get to the point that we respect each other, we can do anything. But it has to be based on respect. You know, I heard somebody talking about being married. You know, somebody said the other day that they've been married for 50 years, and happy married. That ain't true. No, that ain't true. Might been happy married 5 or 10 years. Then, but you learn how to get along with each other. You learn what it's about. You learn what it's about. You know, when I get through doing what I'm doing now, I'm gonna go home. And one of my wife's rules is that when I get home, I got to eat. So she cooks all the time for me. And I don't get home till 10 o'clock. She wake up for me. But once I get in our house, I become a nobody. All my rights, everything that I am, is gone. You know, and I've adjusted to that. There's some place my wife is giving 90%, and I'm only giving 10%. But that's some place I'm even giving 100%. But we balancing out there, and we have some good days, but some bad days too. The woman mean. So, we have some bad days. I mean, but you know.
Are you shaking your head?
Don't feel like the Lone Ranger, man.
No, man, I swear, but other than shit, you gotta talk about 50 years of happy marriage. Boy, can't be a bigger lie than that.
We have to come to an understanding.
Yeah, and it's a good understanding that you can get along. You know, my wife knows what I like, what I don't like. You know, and everything that I wear, my clothes, she's do the clothes thing. Because I'm from the country, really country. You know, and sometimes now if I'm not dressed good, my friends will say, your wife mad at you. She didn't put out the stuff that you would normally wear. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in the interest of time, we need to wrap
Yeah,
this
yeah,
up.
no, I already did.
I think that's a fitting conclusion, the analogy, the recipe for racial progress in America is think like a marriage. We just have to come to a mutual understanding. And on that note, I'll thank you all for coming to the Charleston County Public Library tonight. Come back and see us again.
But that is so true. And that's what scares me about America. Because we are allowing ourselves to be so divided on so many different things that our enemies are now taking advantage of all of those things. And that's the scary part for me. You know, that we have to come up with a way to get along. Because we in this stuff together. Like the lady said on the back there, we gotta have one history. You know, American history. But some of y'all have to work towards making that happen. Because you have to rewrite textbooks. You have to redo so many things to get there. Because the textbook is not inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you.